Good morning and welcome to our Monday Bible study. As we continue in the book of Judges, before we jump in, we'll be looking at Psalm 121. Our group has decided over these next weeks and months that we could continue to hear a good word from the Psalms, reminding us of God's love and comfort during these difficult times. Last week, somebody recommended Psalm 121. So today we'll be reading it from the New Living Translation. As we read together, what I'd like for you to listen for is, how is God speaking to you through this psalm today? What word or phrase sticks out to you? And as you listen to that word or phrase, just hold on to it as we read and as we meditate together. Listen now to these words from Psalm 121. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord: He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust Him. For He will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with His feathers. He will shelter you with His wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. Do not be afraid of the terrors of the night, nor the arrows that flies in the day. Do not dread the disease that stalks in darkness, nor the disaster that strikes at midday. Though 1,000 fall at your side, though 10,000 are dying around you, these evils will not touch you. Just open your eyes and see how the wicked are punished. If you make the Lord your refuge, if you make the Most High your shelter, no evil will conquer you, no plague will come near your home, for He will order His angels to protect you wherever you go. They will hold you up with their hands so that you won't ever hurt your foot on a stone. And you will trample upon lions and cobras, and you will crush fierce lions and serpents under your feet. And the Lord says, I will rescue those who love me. I will protect those who trust in my name. When they call on me, I will answer. I will be there in trouble. I will rescue and honor them. I will reward them with a long life and give them my salvation. What word or phrase sticks out to you in this psalm today?
God is always there, no matter where we are or what we're going through. He is with us.
God's always with us.
Verse 11 spoke to me because I read the article written by Kurt Neely, Dr. Neely, in Spartanburg's paper yesterday. And he was talking about his sister had a child, and it was just an invalid, and it couldn't see, hear, speak, anything. And so the pediatrician told them to put him in a home and let him live there, because he wouldn't live very long. And so anyway, the wife come back in there. She ran in the restroom crying because of the diagnosis, and said when she come back to her husband, she said, get our baby, we're going home. And so anyway, Dr. Neely said that she always said the angels looked after him, and said that he never, spoke or anything like that, but said he had the most beautiful smile at times. Said it just come across his face, and he wouldn't be, he was real active with his arms and legs, and said he would be just as still and quiet, and that big smile would come across his face. And he died when he was 12, and said that he died with that big smile on his face. Mm. There's a beautiful article.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I hope that you'll take comfort in knowing that God's with us during difficult times. And although things do happen to us, we're not protected from everything. Verse 3, for he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease.
As we've been fortunate.
Yeah, we have been fortunate, and our brothers and sisters maybe haven't been. One of the things I'm reminded of is that even when bad things happen to us, God's still there with us. And God's comfort comes in knowing that God never forsakes us, even during those times. So I hope that you'll continue to, I've got Psalm 91 was mentioned last week. If there's other Psalms that come to your mind that you would like for us just to kind of open up with a good word, just remind me of that, especially as we go through Judges, which Judges is a little harsher in tone because it is stories about the in-between of the Israelites coming into the land of Canaan after Joshua and before the time of the kings, beginning in 1 Samuel. And Judges is kind of stories of Israel as a tribal community living in and amongst other nations. And also we see within the narrative the cycle of being faithful to God and unfaithful to God. And we see kind of a degradation of how far they get away from God by the end. So last week we kind of did an introduction to Judges. We looked at the first 3 chapters up until verse 15. We listened to one story of the first judge, and now we begin to see more stories. I've given you a little map that you can have with you. There's 2 different versions of Judges. One's a little blurry, but I like the coloring on it. You get some of the tribes there. And then on the other side, you'll see the main judges that kind of come up within the story, where they're at within the narrative of Judges, but also where the locations are of them. And you get to see some of the other people that are around them, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites. Yeah, I do right here. I'm so sorry, I forgot to give you an extra copy.
Do you have one there?
I've got some right here. And here's a Psalm 2.
I got one of
Okay.
those.
You're fine. So we've got our map here. It may help you as you're reading through these stories, kind of figuring out where things are. So today we pick up in Judges 3, verses 15 and following. So today we begin a story kind of the Judges, and what I want you to hear is to listen to these stories and imagine these stories as oral stories before they're written down. So by the time they're written down, probably during the exile or post-exile, they're written down in the forms that we have them. They were transmitted orally. And we can kind of see how these stories take on an effect when we read them out loud. You know, we kind of start to listen to the text, some of the things that are happening. It draws us in. They're good ways of reading it. After our first story today, when we get to the story of Deborah, there's 2 versions of it. One is a narrative and one is a poetic song. And we'll get to see how both of those oral stories compare and contrast a little bit. So what I want you to do is just listen. I want you to close your eyes and imagine you're sitting by the campfire in ancient Israel and somebody's retelling this story. Maybe you've heard it before, but it's one of those that use your imagination to kind of put it into scene. So we get the repetition. Now the Israelites have gone back into that pattern where they've been faithful and unfaithful. And they cry out to God again, just like the Israelites cried out when they were under the oppression of Pharaoh. We'll see that they're constantly crying out when the oppression of others come on them. But when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up for them a deliverer. Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. I want you just to picture this strong, strapping guy, and the reality is we're told he's left-handed. Just automatically, we know something's different about this man. Now the Israelites were under what we've already heard in verse 14. So the Israelites served King Eglon of Mohab 18 years. So the Israelites are under oppression of the Moabite king. And it's been 18 years of it. And every once in a while they have to send people to the king Eglon to give him tribute, to pay honor to him. So the Israelites sent tribute by him to King Eglon of Moab. And Ehud made for himself a sword with 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he fastened it on his right thigh under his clothes. Now we can imagine any time that someone comes into the court of the king of Moab, they're going to get a little pat down. And everybody's right-handed, for the most part. And where do their swords go? On the left. So he's left-handed. Nobody naturally checks the right. Then he presented the tribute to King Eglon of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. So just imagine this king who is living high on the hog, literally, has become a hog in and of itself. Now when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent the people who carried the tribute on their way. So we can imagine those from Israel have brought up, carts of different tribute to the king. And he sends them on their way. But he himself turned back at the sculpted stones near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. So the king said, silence. And all of his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. Now remember, this is a hot place. And up on the top there of wherever his little fortress is, there's a cool room. And the chamber is his bathroom. So the king's on his other throne. And he's sitting there, and Ehud comes in. He says, I have a message from God to you. So he rose up from his seat. What seat would he be on? Then Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword out from his right thigh, and thrust it into Eglon's belly. The hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed in around the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly. And the dirt came out. Now you can imagine what the dirt means. So these are not stories we normally tell in church, but they're in the Bible, so we're going to read them. So the man's so big that this long 2-edged sword goes thrust in his belly, and it overtakes even the blade. He's a big fella. Now where's he at? On his throne. Then Ehud went out into the vestibule and closed the doors of the roof chamber on him and locked them. So he goes out into the next room, closes the doors, and locks everything. After he had gone, the servants came. Now how does he get out? Some commentators say that the Hebrew is a little obscure. Maybe he went out through the chamber itself. We don't know, but he gets out. And the servants have come. And when they saw the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought he must be relieving himself in the cool chamber. Now remember, the dirt came out, so there's obviously a smell. So they're giving him space. So we imagine sitting around the campfire hearing this story, there's going to be laughter. We sometimes read the Bible as flat, but these stories have stories of humor in them. They have stories, this rich king who's been feasting on his oppression of the others Where is he murdered? He's murdered in his bathroom. His attendants, as he's there lying, dying, his attendants think he's using the restroom. He must be relieving himself in the cool chamber, so they waited until they were embarrassed. You know, he's been going a while. Then they realized, well, something must be wrong. They're embarrassed that they haven't checked on him. So they waited until they were embarrassed. When he had still did not open the door of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened it, and there was their Lord lying dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed and passed beyond the sculpted stones and escaped to Sierra. So Ehud escaped, and as he's going into where the king of Mohab is and away from it, he's passing these sculpted stones. And the Israelites, hearing the story, know these are the idols of the Moabites. He's passing their who's not protected, what? They've not done anything for this Moabite king, these false gods. When he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went down with him from the hill country, waiting, having him at their head. And he said to them, "Follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemy, the Moabites, in your hand." So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and allowed no one to cross over. At the same time, they killed about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. No one escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. So how does God use Ehud, son of Gera, as a judge in Israel? One commentator says God uses him in a left-handed way. But it's through trickery, it's through, these are stories that are told that remind us that this weak little nation is often using its what? Its guile. We go back to the story of Jacob and Esau. How does Jacob steal Esau's birthright? Through what? Trickery. And God uses someone like Jacob to become the father of 12 tribes. And the story of God's people is that God uses unconventional ways sometimes to do God's will, using people like Ehud, who we see seems to be a person that takes the initiative that God gives and doesn't do anything negative. So as we read the stories of the judges, he's remembered as a good judge. And what happens is good. It's still a very odd story. And that's okay. That makes it even more enjoyable to read. So imagine these stories that have been told over and over again. And we see the story of the judges as stories about the people that God chooses to use to bring the people back to God. But it is told from a story of an ancient people where violence is commonplace. So we're not going to use too much of our contemporary ethics at the moment for these stories. We'll read them and kind of enjoy the way they're told, but also have to say to ourselves, some of these stories can be a little bit much. So we get from one judge to another judge. After him came Shagmar, son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad. He too delivered Israel. And that's all we know of him. But what we can infer from him is he's not given a tribe, so he's not an Israelite. This minor judge that comes up isn't an Israelite, and he defeats 600 of the Philistines with what? Yeah, an ox goad, some part of an ox, a jawbone. And we'll see what? a different story with that later. But this is someone who delivered Israel, who God uses, who's outside Israel that God uses. And we'll see that played out in our next story. So what we have today is chapters 4 and 5, and we're going to read those and kind of focus on those for the rest of our time together. Before I do, when you think of the story of Deborah, what comes to your mind? Last week when I asked you what the judges, y'all all kind of seem to remember Deborah. So when you hear Deborah's story, what comes to your mind? I'll add the cricket noise to the video later.
Well, the women were prominent.
Yeah.
Played a very important role in.
Yes, yes. So the story we're going to have today, several unexpected things happen. And one of the things I want us to hear is try to listen to the story for the first time and see who do we think is the judge within the story. Who's the person God's going to use to get the victory for God's people over their enemy. So the judge within the book of Judges can be viewed sometimes as the person who arbitrates justice, like a judge that we think of, someone who rules, or someone who is like a military champion. And within the story we have a little bit of all of those. Anything else that sticks out to you when you think about that story? Well, let's read it, and we're going to read in chapter 4 and 5 two versions. The first version is a narrative form of the story. The second is poetic. And the second one that we'll read in the poetry is probably one of the oldest written forms within the Old Testament, because the Hebrew in it is much more ancient than the rest of Judges, but it may be one of the earliest written forms of any Hebrew within the Old Testament. And it goes back to a time within Hebrew's history that is very ancient in their history as they're writing. So let's listen to the story. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harestoth ha-Goyim. And the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly 20 years. So now the Israelites are under a new king of the Canaanites. And not only is he a cruel king, but he has a huge army of chariots. So it shows not only his army, but his wealth. At that time, Deborah, a prophetess, wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel. So we're introduced right away to Deborah. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came up to her for judgment. So we are told that she's a prophetess. She is able to discern God's will, and that people come to her as a literal judge, wanting to settle whatever's going on in their lives, wanting judgment from her. She sent and summoned Barak, son of Abdamon, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take position at Mount Tabor, bringing 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the Wadi Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." So Deborah calls forth Barak as what appears to be Deborah calling forth a judge. Because what do the judges do? They go and give military victory. So as we begin the story, we think of initially, is Deborah the judge? And then we get to Barak. And then we'll question, is Barak the judge? Or does it go back to Deborah? Or does it go to somebody else? But she calls Barak out, and she says to him, essentially, you're going to be the contemporary, the reverse of the Canaanite's general. And you're going to go and defeat him, and he's going to fall into your hands because the Lord's going to be with you. So imagine Deborah, who is the prophetess of Israel at this time, calls forth this person to be the person to go and to liberate God's people. And we would expect he would be like Ehud from our earlier story, just go and do it. But what does he do? Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. So the Hebrew is a little bit, gives obscurity. We don't know if it is he wants the prophetess to be with him because he knows that this is God's spokesperson, or because he's afraid. We don't know. But from this moment on, the story takes a different turn. So listen to what she says. She says, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Circe into the hand of a woman. Now, she had already told him that it was going to be in his hands. But maybe because he questions, we don't know. Now the prophetess tells a different outcome. You'll have victory, but whose hand will Circe come into? Won't be your hand. It's going to be the hand of what? Of a woman. Well, as we read the story, you hear it for the first time, we're going to think, well, maybe Deborah's going to be the judge now. Maybe she'll be the one to get the victory. Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 warriors went up behind him, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Canaanite has separated from other Canaanites, that is, the descendants of Mohab, the father-in-law of Moses, and encamped as far away as Eglon ben Zadban, which is near Kadesh. So we got this Heber the Canaanite. Now the Canaanites are another tribe that aren't part of Israel, that have essentially lived in between Israel and Canaan, the Canaanites. And for the most part, they've lived as kind of a neutral. They're like the Sweden of the area. They're not getting involved. But Heber decides to move away and live in a different place, and he seems to have taken a special interest of not necessarily not being neutral. When Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abdamon, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called all of his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the troops who were with him from Haroshath-Harlagam, the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day on which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand, and the Lord indeed is going out before you. So who's the warrior within the story? It's as much Barak as it is the Lord. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 warriors following him. And the Lord threw Sisera and all of his chariots and all his army into a panic before Barak. Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot, while Barak pursued the chariots and the army of Haroshath-Hagagim. And all the army of Sisera fell by sword. No one was left. But this great general of the Canaanites, what does he do? He runs away. So we've got this battle that takes place, and as it's taking place, the Lord goes out before Barak and his army, this 10,000 strong, and they defeat all of these charioteers. And the great general of the king of Canaan does what? He runs away. Now listen to what happens. Now Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Canaanite. For there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the clan of Heber the Canaanite. So it appears that Heber, this Canaanite that we're already introduced to, is somehow in allegiance with the Canaanite king. So this general, Sisera, thinks that he has found a safe place to be. So he goes to the wife, Jael, wife of Heber, he goes to her tent, for there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and Heber the Canaanite. Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear." So I want you to imagine within the story, this woman comes to the tent, this man is running for his life, he's like a scared little kid, and Mama Bear's there ready to welcome him. Come into the tent. Come on, come on. It's a safe place. So he turned aside to her and into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. This frayed man is now finding what? Shelter in this woman's tent, and she begins to treat him like a child, a scared little child. He lays down, she covers him up like a little baby. Then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." What does she give him? She opened a skin of milk and gave him drink and covered him. And he said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anyone comes and asks, 'Is anyone here?' say no." Mama, would you leave the little light on and the door cracked? This is a general. And he's asking this woman to keep him safe. There's humor in the story. We read it flat. It doesn't make sense if we don't read it with the emotion that's there. She gives him milk, makes him go to sleep. But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg. Now imagine these big tents, they've got to be staked in the ground. She takes a tent peg and a hammer in her hand, and she gently, softly goes to him and drives the tent peg into his temple. So just imagine, he's over there snoring, sleeping, feeling safe. And Mama Bear goes over there and takes and just boom. Now within the story of the Israelites, this is a woman who all sense and purposes has no power. Throughout the story of Judges, we will see women who are abused and raped. This woman takes power, and the image here is almost, I hate to say it that way, but it's an image where she takes her power and instead of being the one violated, violates him. This is a woman who uses what God has given her to be the vessel to which God uses what Deborah has already told Barak. Whose hand will Sisera be thwarted with? A woman's hand. Then as Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." You can think Barak, he's bloody from battle. He's like, "I'm going to get him now. He's mine." So he went into her tent, and there was Sisera laying dead with the tent peg in his temple. So on that day, God subdued King Jabin of Canaan before the Israelites. Then the hand of the Israelites bore harder and harder on King Jabin of Canaan until they destroyed King Jabin of Canaan. Then Deborah and Barak, son of Abdon, sang on the day, saying. So when we go back to the Exodus story and we see that Moses, after the people have been liberated from Egypt, they've crossed over the Jordan. Now they are free from the tyranny of Pharaoh. Pharaoh has been drowned in the waters. Immediately in the Exodus story, we get songs. Moses will lead in worship, and followed by Moses will be his sister. Here, in a similar way, we get a story of liberation from God's enemies, and it's retold, the story becomes retold in song, in poetry. So let's listen to the stories as it's retold in poetry. When locks are long in Israel, when the people offer themselves willingly, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes, to the Lord I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, you went out from Seir, and you marched from the region of Edom, and the earth trembles, and the heavens poured, the clouds indeed poured water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shagmar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased, and travelers kept to the byways. And the peasantry prospered in Israel. They grew fat on plunder because you arose Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, the war was in the gates, was shield on spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel. My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. Tell of it, you who rode on white donkeys, who sit on rich carpets, and you who walk by the way. To the sound of musicians at the watering places, they there repeat the triumphs of the Lord, the triumphs of the peasantry in Israel. Then down to the gates marched the people of the Lord. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abdon. Then down marched the remnant of the noble, the people of the Lord marched down from him against the mighty. From Ephraim they sent out into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kin. From Machir marched down to the commanders. From Zebulun, those who bear the marshal's staff. The chiefs of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar faithful to Barak. Into the valley they rushed out into the hills. Among the clans of Reuben, they were great searchings of heart. Why did you tarry among the sheepfolds to hear the pipings of the flock? Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Gildad stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did you abide with the ships? Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, settling down by his landings. Zebulun is a people that scorn death, and Naphtali too, on the heights of the field. The kings came, they fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh and the waters of Megiddo, and they got no spoils of silver. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses they fought against Assyria. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. The onrushing torrent, the torrent of Kishon, march on, my soul, with might. The loud beat of the horses' hooves with the galloping of his steeds. Curse Meroz, says the angel of the Lord. Curse Bidli, its inhabitants, because they did not come to help of the Lord, the help of the Lord against the mighty. Most blessed of the women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite, of tent-dwelling woman, most blessed. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. And he put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera a blow. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank, he fell. He lay still at her feet. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. Out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera gazed through the lattice. Why is the chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of the chariots? Her wisest ladies make answer indeed. She answers the question herself. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A girl or two of every man, spoiled and dyed and stuffs of Sisera, spoiled of dyed stuffs, embroidered 2 pieces of dyed work, embroidered for my neck is spoil. So perish all your enemies of the Lord. May your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might. 2 different ways to tell the same story. What we get within the story of this poem, the Song of Deborah here, is we get that within the beginning of it, we see through poetry, through song, how the people of God are kind of under oppression, more so than we see within the other story. They're called peasants. They are the ones that are constantly being broken. And we hear the awakening of Deborah. Awake, awake, Deborah. And she becomes the priestess, the prophetess of the people. Arise, Barak, take your captives. We hear the story of the 12 tribes, or the tribes, as they engage or don't engage within the way the battle goes. Then we get the story of the battle itself, and we hear it in dramatic form as it can only come in poetry. The loud beats of the horses' hooves with galloping of their steeds. You know, imagining the ferocity of chariots coming after you, just that that sound like thunder. And within the story, we hear more of God and God's forces battling in the background. Cruz Moreau says the angel of the Lord calls bitterly its inhabitants because they did not come to help the Lord, the help of the Lord mighty against them. We see in the background the war that is taking place with God and God's angels. And then we get the story of Jael and her murder of this great general. And then we get another section that we don't get the other place. We get the general's mother waiting by the window for her son, wondering what spoils of war he's going to bring back for her. And the realization, he's not coming back. For his other mother, the mother that he sought refuge from, has killed him. So he's a mama's boy. It's essentially what the story is reminding us of. And the mama that he found was not the nurturing kind. So within the story of Deborah and Barak and Jael, we still are left wondering which of these is the judge. Which is the one that God used? Are all of them the judge, or is it Jael? And Jael is the one in both stories that is the one who is what? Who is not a part of Israel, but God uses to defeat the Canaanite general who after his death in the army, now the king of Canaan, has no force to be reckoned with. What comments, questions do you have of the two stories we read today? One of a warrior who, through his left hand, defeats a king, and who leads his people in victory over a much larger army. Or the story of Deborah and Barak and Jael, who each one of these we wonder who's the main hero, and they all really are. If anybody doesn't like these stories, Janice is the one that wanted to look at Judges. And she's got the biggest smile of all of you, so she's really enjoying these stories. Yeah, they are. They are. What we'll notice as we continue, we won't continue today with any of the other stories. I want us to read them and enjoy them. I don't want us to go too far ahead of ourselves. We'll read a couple of stories every week and continue. And it's not a very long book, so we won't be in it too long. What I want you to do is to continue to read, ask questions of the text, but be reminded that these were stories that were told over and over again before they were ever written down. And within the telling of the stories, there is humor. There are things that we might seem as crass today, but, when we tell stories or we read books, these are the kind of things that we still enjoy, these kind of stories. As they're remembering these ancient people that have lived, these stories have been told and retold in ways that probably lead us to some embellishment, but it also leads us to continue to see God's hand as a part of every story. And even when the people are saved by God, as God is their divine warrior in the story of Deborah and Barak and Jael, even when God displays this great victory, as He's displayed against Pharaoh, as He continually redeems His people out of an oppressive hand, the people continue to do what? Turn away from God. And it's a constant cycle we see within the biblical text. And as we talked about, the story of Pharaoh becomes the story of the Moabites and the Canaanites and all of those that will follow, even to Israel itself, as it becomes more like Pharaoh in the world. And the prophets will come up to them during the times of the kings and say, "You have forgotten justice. You are worshiping other gods." To the point that God will leave Israel to its own sin, and eventually from the prophets, their determination, it is because of this that God will take you into exile. But even in the story of exile, God still liberates God's people from an oppressive king and brings them back to the land. And as we talked about in Romans, the Apostle Paul sees the most oppressive force, the most oppressive part of the world. Even in Rome's oppression, he sees sin as the ultimate culprit of oppression. And it is Christ who comes and liberates us from that oppressive force. Because that oppressive force leads to death. Death of relationship with God and with others, and death eternal. And Jesus comes and liberates us from that. And even as the church, we still go through those cycles as God's people. So we'll continue to read in Judges. I'd like for us to enjoy our time in it. As I remind you, these aren't bedtime stories. These aren't stories I'm going to read to Lily before bed. Most of us, when we've read Judges, is stories of Samson and Delilah, those kind of stories, and they've been the hard edges have been kind of softened. But I want us to hear these stories with everything that's in them, because they are wonderful stories of wonderful characters that we can go back to and see humor in, but also understand that this was the way the world was at a different time. And it was, yeah. And the heroes that are told aren't the classic heroes we would imagine. These are people that, a woman who takes a person in her tent and makes them feel like a child and then rams a spike through their head. Or a man who talks to a man on his chamber and ends up killing him and leaves him, and his servants are out there, is he done? These aren't stories that you'll hear in probably sermons too many times. Maybe one day, maybe we'll sneak them in there. So let me close this in prayer. If y'all have any comments, questions, we'll talk about them. God, we thank you for the day. We thank you that we can laugh, that we can be amazed sometimes of the scripture that we've had in front of us this whole time, and hear stories for the first time and to see them in fresh and new ways. Lord, help us to be a people that continually turn towards you. Let us be reminded that as your people, the farther we get from you, the worse that our condition can become. But God, even in the time of the judges, even in the time of the kings, even in the time of the New Testament, you raised up people to bring people back to you. God, we continue to pray that you'll continue to call those voices out in our community and in our world. God, use the negative things around us as stimulus for us to draw closer to you if need be. Not that you necessarily cause it, but that you can use all things for good. God, we continue to pray for those in our community who are sick, who have had a loss, and continue to use us as a church as a source of hope and light and love. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.